Good morning. I'm Doug Krisner. Here are the stories we're following today. We begin now by looking at what's happening in the electric vehicle space. Tesla delivering more EVs than expected in the fourth quarter. However, that wasn't enough for the company to stay ahead of its Chinese rival BYD in global EV sales. Here is Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow.
In the fourth quarter, 484,507 EVs delivered by Tesla. That was ahead of estimates, and it does mean that Tesla exceeded its target of 1.8 million vehicles in 2023. Go back to a year ago, January 2023, the first earnings call of the year, where Elon Musk said that 2 million units would be possible in the full year. So they beat the 1.8 million official guidance, but it fell short of that kind of higher bound target that Elon Musk had outlined.
That is Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow. So now BYD is the new number one in EVs globally, driven mainly by the company's much broader lineup of cheaper models in China. Incidentally, we're going to be taking a closer look at the Tesla story with Bloomberg's David Welsh. That's coming up. Tesla shares were down today by just 0.2%. Paul?
And it was a disappointing final quarter for another one of America's largest electric vehicle makers. Bloomberg's Tom Busby has more.
Despite ramping up production over the past year, the Los Angeles area-based electric engine vehicle maker Rivian Automotive saw shares tumble on Tuesday after missing deliveries for the fourth quarter, only by about 140 vehicles. Rivian makes an EV pickup truck and a sport utility vehicle for consumers, but also a battery electric delivery van for Amazon, the e-tail giant, its biggest single shareholder. Tom Busby, Bloomberg Radio.
We move to Apple next. The company shares were down more than 3.5% today, the biggest drop we've seen since September. This is after analysts over at Barclays said they are expecting softer demand for the iPhone. So they have downgraded Apple stock as a result. By the way, it's the first time Barclays cut Apple to underweight since 2019. But as Bloomberg's Mandeep Singh tells us, don't count Apple out as artificial intelligence gains traction.
We are going through a massive refresh cycle, and cloud companies are the major beneficiaries of that. We still don't know when that will happen, but we know it will happen. It's a matter of time. The large language models, the technology, the co-pilots will run on your phones. And right now, there is no alternative device except for your Apple ecosystem, whether it's your phones or your PCs.
That is Bloomberg's Mandeep Singh. Now, it's not clear exactly when Apple will become the big beneficiary of artificial intelligence. Paul?
The president of Harvard is stepping down. We've got more from Bloomberg's Ann Cates.
Claudine Gay's exit ends her brief and tumultuous tenure marred by allegations of plagiarism and a campus controversy over anti-Semitism following the October 7th attack by Hamas on Israel. She got her start in July as Harvard's first black president and had the backing of the university's governing council as recently as mid-December. Since then, new questions have surfaced about her academic work, and a donor revolt has worsened over criticism of Harvard for not speaking out after more than 30 student groups blamed Israel solely for the violence. In Washington, Ann Cates, Bloomberg Radio.
We go to China next, where the central bank has injected nearly $50 billion into policy-oriented banks as a way of stimulating the economy. The story from Bloomberg's Joanne Wong in Hong Kong.
The $50 billion worth of low-cost funds is the largest increase via the central bank's pledged supplemental lending program. This takes the outstanding amount of the PSL program to $456 billion. The program is seen as an important tool for Beijing to shore up the property sector and stabilize growth this year. Markets have been expecting the central bank to use the money to drive construction of public housing to alleviate a property slump that's hammered consumer confidence. In Hong Kong, I'm Joanne Wong, Bloomberg Radio.
Let's move on to global news next. And we have Hamas saying that Israel has killed a senior leader in Beirut. Ed Baxter has more from the Bloomberg Newsroom. Eddie.
All right, thank you, Douglas. Yeah, the leader, Saleh al-Aruri, saying that to have been the mastermind behind the militant arm in the West Bank, the Israeli attack, an apparent drone strike in Beirut's southern suburbs, the first such attack in the Lebanese capital in nearly 2 decades. Lebanon's caretaker prime minister, Najib Mikati, says that the attack is a new Israel crime and that aims to drag Lebanon into a new phase of confrontations. Hagar Shanali, Greenwich Media CEO, says actually the action was pretty predictable.
What you saw today, for example, in Beirut, is not totally surprising, and I don't expect it to explode into some kind of full-scale war. And the reason for that is that That strike was specifically to hit a Hamas leader, in particular, Saleh Aruri, who has funded and directed operations in the West Bank and who has been tied to kidnappings, hijackings, and other terrorist attacks.
Shanali, on Bloomberg's balance of power, there's been no official comment from Israel. Harvard University President Claudine Gay has resigned today, involved in two issues that she says made her a distraction. The first, when she was called before Congress in December to testify about Harvard's anti-Semitism policies. This was in December.
We embrace a commitment to free expression, even of views that are objectionable, offensive, hateful. It's when that speech crosses into conduct that violates our policies against bullying, harassment.
Does that speech not cross that barrier?
There with Congresswoman Elaine Stefanik. And Bloomberg's David Weston says the second issue, accusation of plagiarism.
About some of the work that President Gay had done for her dissertation, for her PhD, and allegations that she had improperly used sources that she did not identify. Initially, the corporation of Harvard, which is what they call the Board of Trustees, the corporation, said there'd been an investigation, and they had totally exonerated her. There was no problem, but now she said she stepped down.
And David says he takes her at her word, distraction. We'll have more on this in just a few minutes. Donald Trump has filed a lawsuit seeking to restore his name to Maine's presidential primary after the state disqualified because of attempt to reverse the 2020 election. Politically, Bloomberg's Gregory Corti says any activity like this always helps his polling.
And look, every time an issue like this has popped up, at least in the short term, former President Trump gets a little bit of a blip in the polls among Republican likely voters. It's not a permanent blip. It always just sort of reverts back to the mean, but there is sort of a rallying around Trump effect that happens every time that Republicans feel like he's being picked on.
Trump suit alleges Secretary of State Shenna Bellows is a biased decision maker. Horrific airline collision in Japan's Haneda Airport has left 5 people dead. Crew members of the Japan Airlines Airbus SC-350-900, they all got out. The crew of Japan Airlines Airbus is being characterized as heroes today because all 379 passengers managed to escape after their plane hit the Japan Coast Guard plane on the runway. Now, 5 of the 6 crew members on the Coast Guard crew were killed. Authorities say the JAL was cleared to take off.
They kept going on down the runway. The airplane eventually came to a stop, skidded to a stop. You can see at least the right engine is still turning. They deployed the emergency evacuation slides, and everybody got off safely. But that wouldn't have happened if that Japanese Coast Guard aircraft had hit just a few feet closer in towards the fuselage.
That is ABC's Steve Ganyard, as heard here on Bloomberg. And global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. In San Francisco, I'm Ed Baxter. This is Bloomberg.
Daybreak Asia, we're about 11 minutes past the hour as we take a closer look now at Tesla with Bloomberg's David Welch. He is our Detroit bureau chief. David, it's always a pleasure. Thanks for being with us. Was this really a surprise that Tesla kind of fell behind BYD?
Not really. Tesla's growth rates have been slowing. Still a growth company, but it's really come way down. And BYD just keeps building sales all the time. It's kind of a hot company right now. The other thing is BYD relies on the Chinese market for sales growth. In China, EV sales are not only growing faster just because the market's bigger, and it's really the thing there, but the government mandates this practically. You can't even get new vehicle registrations in some of the big cities unless it's an electric vehicle. There are heavy incentives for it. It is the EV market in the world. So if you're the dominant EV player in the Chinese market and you're a Chinese domestic brand, also hot right now, you're going to keep growing. Tesla's relying in significant degree on the U.S. market, where EV sales aren't doing that well. They're still growing in the U.S. This myth that they're going in reverse is not really true, but they're not growing as fast.
So it sounds like you're describing a new normal for Tesla. What does the future look like for this company?
Again, Tesla's still growing, but the idea that they're going to hit 2 million vehicle sales, they're probably not going to reach that. It sounds like, from what they were saying with the sales report, that they're looking at sales growth rates in the 20% range. It wasn't that long ago, 12, 18 months ago, they were still talking about 50% growth rates. Last earnings call, Elon Musk said they can't grow at 50% anymore. They've given up the ghost on that, but I think it's still significantly less. In fairness, one of the reasons the stock didn't do too badly today is because no other car company is growing at 18-20%. And if that's the projected growth rate for Tesla, it could still even be better than that with the Cybertruck. That's still very good. It's just not the meteoric growth company that it has been for years.
David, I'm wondering about the overall market for EVs, given the fact that yesterday in the U.S., that would be January 1st, the government issued some new rules for a $7,500 consumer tax credit. And now the total number of vehicles eligible is only 13. That's down from about 24 earlier. What is this going to mean for not just Tesla, but the overall market?
It's going to make it tougher. We sort of thought, I think, 8 months ago, that every vehicle out there would be getting these $7,500 credits. Some of these vehicles will, in the very near future, be added to that list. General Motors said some of its vehicles, they're in the process of resourcing some of the battery ingredients for those vehicles, and they will be qualified, they said, sometime in the first quarter, maybe second quarter. So you're looking at a few months where some of the GM vehicles, Cadillac Lyriq, and I think the Blazer and Silverado, won't get the credits, but in a few months they will. But still, we really thought this was going to be the big shot in the arm, and it's something that all the companies are going to have to work harder to get that money for their EV buyers. So that's not going to, that's not automatic, and we're going to need to get that momentum. And I think in the U.S. we're still in this issue where luxury buyers, early adopters have their EVs, and now we're kind of moving into the mass market. And even consumers who spend a pretty good amount of money on new vehicles, they're not convinced the charging network is there. They're not convinced that they need to spend $58,000 on a Chevy Blazer with a battery in it when they can get one with an engine in it that costs $35,000 or $40,000. Still a lot more money to spend on some of these vehicles. And consumers, EVs have captured the imagination. They just haven't captured the wallet yet in the mass market.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, Tesla has been hitting that higher niche market. I mean, here in Australia, it's certainly not a cheap car, and it attracts luxury car tax, in fact. Is Tesla working on future models, cheaper models, and perhaps smaller models?
They are, but the thing with Tesla is Elon Musk always promises a very low sales price, and they usually don't quite hit it. We're supposed to have a Cybertruck under $40,000, and it's considerably more than that. The cheap vehicle is the Model 2, which is supposed to be well under $30,000. We'll see when that comes out and where he ends up pricing it, because that vehicle could be like a lot of other Teslas, where not only is it not on time, the Cybertruck was at least a year late, it ended up being priced more than they say. General Motors had the Chevy Equinox. They said it was going to be priced at $30,000, coming in at $35,000 to start. That's still a pretty good price considering where new vehicles sell in the U.S. market today. And that $35,000 Blazer gets 320 miles of range instead of the 250 that they were talking about with a $30,000 model. But you see what I'm saying. Every time a new EV comes out, it's more expensive than they told us it was going to be a year ago. And price matters.
Well, you mentioned the Tesla Cybertruck. How does it go head-to-head with Ford's F-150 Lightning, that EV pickup?
Yeah, I think, GM's Silverado EV is in the process of coming out right now. I think for those buyers, you're talking about, these are two different calculations. I mean, GM and, the Chevy and Ford truck buyers, some of them will use this thing as a work vehicle. For those who buy it as kind of a statement or a fun vehicle, the Cybertruck really could be a competitor. But I would see the Cybertruck going more head-to-head with Rivian's pickup, because neither one is a work truck. They're both kind of fashion statements in a way. Very, very different fashion statements, mind you. But they're more of a recreational fashion truck for somebody who's not going to use the bed that much and isn't going to be towing and hauling a lot of stuff.
Is this why we didn't see Cybertruck numbers included in the release this quarter?
Well, look, this is Tesla. I think we didn't see Cybertruck numbers because they were very low. You can bet if and when the numbers are very good, they'll be headlining the Cybertruck sales number.
We'll leave it there, David. Always pleasure. David Welsh, Bloomberg's Detroit bureau chief. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Asia, your morning brief on the stories making news from Hong Kong to Singapore and Wall Street. Look for us on your podcast feed every day on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcast. You can also listen live each day on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco. Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, Sirius XM Channel 119, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Doug Krisner. Join us again tomorrow for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Asia.